Live to Westminster, Alistair Darling is there. There was a clip in the report there, but let's talk to him now. He leads the Better Together campaign, which opposes the independence thought. Mr Darling, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thanks very much for coming in. First of all, can I just change maybe the way that we're reading this Mark Carney speech today? He's basically saying that the currency union could work. It could be perfectly workable if the right foundations are in place.
Well, a currency union, if it's going to work, requires two things. Firstly, there's a matter of principle that both sides, both would be foreign countries then, would have to agree to pool each other's sovereignty and agree each other's budgets. That's what you're seeing happening in the Eurozone today. In other words, both the rest of the UK and Scotland would have to agree on tax, spend and borrowing, something that the nationalists have consistently denied. The second thing is you've got the practical implications of this. If you are agreeing each other's tax and spend and borrowing, firstly, no one has asked the rest of the UK whether or not they're willing to do this. This is a debate in Scotland, not elsewhere. But secondly, what it means is that Scotland, having become independent, would then be giving away the very powers they say that they need if they're going to make a difference. And I just don't see the sense of that. What the real problem is here, you have to understand what the politics are. People in Scotland do want to keep the pound, but the only way you can guarantee to do so is if we stay in the UK, because if you don't get this currency union, you're then driven back on plan B, and the nationalists refuse point blank to tell us what that fallback position is.
Governor wasn't there today to make a political speech, that's clear, but do you think he's changed the terms of the debate today?
Well, he spelt out in stark terms, and he's pretty neutral on this. He's a Canadian as well as the governor of the Bank of England. That for a currency union to work, and we've seen this with the Eurozone, it can only work if you have increased economic then political union, the very thing that nationalism is dead against. You see that in Europe. The Eurozone has not worked in the way that they thought it would work because you didn't have that economic and political union. You're now seeing them changing that situation, where they all have to submit their budgets to the European Commission before they submit it to their own parliaments. And as I say to you, this is a massive step you're asking the rest of the UK to take, where potentially another country, Scotland, who would then be a foreign country, would have a veto over what it taxed and spent and borrowed. Now that is something which I honestly don't think is ever going to happen. And if that doesn't happen, if you don't get agreement to that, you have no currency union. And if you've got no currency union, you mean that Scotland's either got to set up its own currency or join the euro. Whatever happens is you're taking on a whole bunch of risks you don't have today, and risks that Scotland frankly doesn't want.
We'll be talking to Mr Swinney in a short while, Mr Darling, but his line earlier today, and I've just been reading a statement here, is that he's saying, look, the benefits of a currency union are clear and should be clear to both sides, to the rest of the UK and to Scotland. Why on earth wouldn't the rest of the UK, he says, adopt that union given the benefits involved?
Well, what I suggest to Mr Swinney, in the nicest possible way, of course, is to actually read what the Governor of the Bank of England had to say. And he said for a currency union to work, you have to agree on basic things like tax and spend and borrowing. You also have to agree in relation to the banking union you would need, that the rest of the UK would be, for example, prepared to underwrite Scottish banks. And we know that's been problematic over the last 5 years or so. You have to reach a whole bunch of agreements, which nobody has asked the rest of the UK about. And I just think that to simply rely on an assertion that the rest of the country will fall in behind whatever Alex Salmond happens to want is just flying in the face of reality, which is why I don't think it'll ever happen. And that, as someone who lives in Scotland, I would like to know then, if we're not having a currency union, what do we have? Is it a new currency? In which case, what's my currency worth? Are we going to be forced to join the euro? Well, I don't think many of us want to do that. Or do we tag along like Panama does with America, using its dollar? This is one of the most critical issues in this referendum campaign. The nationalists simply assert that somehow everybody will fall into line with this currency union. They'll agreeing to give away powers on both sides when no one's asked them about this. It's just flying in the face of reality. I just do not think it'll happen.
On the broader line from Mr Carney about ceding national sovereignty as part of this economic equation, if you like, that's not such a dramatic thing, is it? Because ceding sovereignty in terms of cooperating economically is nothing new, and we've seen it in plenty of different arenas around the world. That in itself, for you, is not a block, is it?
Well, look, we are Scotland at the moment is part of the United Kingdom, and as part of that, the 4 countries in the Union cede sovereignty, at various levels. In Scotland, for example, the Scottish Parliament deals with health, education and so on, but in economic matters, we pool sovereignty, as indeed the UK does within the European Union. But what we're talking about is something different. Today, we have a pound. It is something that and Bank of England, England's monetary policy, it's all fixed at the end of the day by the UK. And we're equal partners in that. What you're suggesting here is a completely different arrangement, rather like the Eurozone, where you'd have 2 foreign countries agreeing to have a currency union, but in order to make it work, you'd have to try and rebuild the very political and economic structures you just destroyed. That's the difference. A currency union like the pound works because we have economic union, because we have political union and therefore accountability. The nationalists want to destroy that and then try and recreate something like the Eurozone, where you can see today the tensions that come there. Germany's refusing point blank to underwrite, the banks in southern Europe. You've got all the stresses and strains where they have to submit their budgets to a European Commission before they can submit them to their very own parliaments. So I think the whole idea this would automatically happen, that the rest of the UK, who I say has never been asked about this, would simply fall into line because Alex Salmond is frightened of the consequences of telling people in Scotland, well, actually, you may not have the pound. That just seems to be fanciful, which is why I don't think it's ever going to happen. And the critical thing, go back to the clips you took from the streets of Edinburgh this afternoon. People in Scotland do want the pound. We've got the pound today, and the only way you can guarantee to keep the pound is if we stay within the United Kingdom. You cannot guarantee it. If we take a leap in the dark and vote to go our separate ways in September, it just simply won't happen.
Mr. Darling, again, good of you to come in. Thanks very much.